I'm Mac McWayne with Boxley Materials. I've been at Boxley for 7 years, worked in asphalt crews for 2 years while I finished school, and I've been in safety now for 2.5, almost 3 years. Today we're going to talk about work zone safety. The agenda for today, we're going to start out, I always find it's good to start out with a story to kind of put things in perspective about a near miss that we had in our work zone. Then I'll move into some statistics, just overall national and then state safety statistics in the work zone. We'll move into work zone safety compliance. We'll talk about some of the training requirements, obviously not all of the training requirements today. And then we'll finish up with some work zone risks and then best practices in the work zone. So this near miss we experienced, it was a couple of years ago. We were paving on Route 60 in Amherst, and we were deep milling and paving back. And our flagger in the work zone noticed a car coming up over a hill. He'd already let the line of traffic go through, saw this car coming up, thought he'd let them catch up and go through. As the car approached, he noticed this woman was going really fast, so he flipped it back over to stop. She didn't slow up at all. He tried to get her attention, but obviously following our best practices, he got out of the road, let her go through. She did not realize that she was in the work zone until she had dropped into the, I believe, 4-inch cut we had milled out of Route 60. Once he dropped into that 4-inch cut, she realized that she was in a work zone. She came up, brought her head up from her phone, overcorrected out of the cut, went into the guardrail, and flipped her car, as you can see there. We actually adopted a few best practices following this accident, one of which was to give our flaggers air horns, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. But that way, a flagger can alert not only the driver, but also alert the crews down the road to an oncoming hazard. One of the scary things about this accident was that right there on the guardrail, there just about 10 or 15 minutes before this, there had been 6 or 7 guys sitting on the guardrail resting, taking a break. They had gotten back up to resume work when this accident occurred, luckily, and nobody was hurt. The driver walked away uninjured as well. But it's a really good example of what we deal with every day on the road, with drivers distracted by their cell phones. We tell our guys all the time, and everybody out there in a work zone has to assume that every car that's driving by does not see you. You've got to assume that every one of those cars is on their cell phone and not paying attention to you or the work zone. So to talk about now some work zone safety statistics, 765 people died in roadway work zone crashes in the U.S. in 2016. 14% were pedestrians, 19% were construction workers, and 67% were drivers and passengers. We can't preach this enough to anybody and everybody, not only our guys, but also people that aren't aware of what goes on in a work zone and aren't used to working around construction in the road. 4 out of 5 work zone fatalities are drivers. 1 work zone fatality occurs every 15 hours. 1 work zone injury occurs every 14 minutes. And approximately 700 people are killed and more than 35,000 people are injured in work zone crashes each year. And these numbers are pretty staggering, I think. And I think one major contributor to the increase in some work zone accidents and deaths, especially in Virginia, has been the rise of technology and distractions like cell phones. Crashes on the rise statewide. In Virginia, from 2016 to 2017, there was a 9.8% increase in work zone crashes, and that's 2,666 compared to 2,428 in 2016. A 12.7% increase in work zone injuries, and a 20% increase in work zone fatalities. So there were 12 fatalities in 2017 compared to 10 in 2016. And I think a lot of it, again, is distracted drivers, but also we're doing a lot of road work in the state. There's a lot of roads to be repaired and replaced, and also expanding other roads. I like this slide. It's a good example of why it's important to, whenever you can, to put a police officer in your work zone. So 5-year work zone crashes by presence of workers from 2011 to 2015. So with no workers present, there's about 44% of the crashes. With no law enforcement was 42%, but the real important number in this is 14% with law enforcement. So when you have a police officer in the work zone, it really reduces the amount of accidents you have in the work zone. I know with our experience out there, seeing those blue lights makes a huge difference. I mean, sometimes it seems like no matter how many signs we put up, no matter what we do, you're gonna have drivers just blasting through your work zone. But as soon as you put a police officer in your work zone, that really grabs the attention of the traveling public. And we also encourage, obviously, good communication with police officers. Let them know that we don't just want them out there with their lights on. We expect them to also pull over a few people and issue citations, because that's going to get people talking in the area and really slow traffic down through our work zone. And it's going to reduce the amount of accidents we experience. Worker fatal injuries by incident, event, and source. So transportation events accounted for 73% of roadway work zone fatal occupational injuries during the 5-year period. In 61% of these transportation events, the worker was struck by a vehicle in the work zone. Backing vehicles accounted for 64 of the 240 worker deaths in a work zone for which the direction of travel was recorded. I think that's really important to talk about, because I would say second only to the traveling public, one of the most dangerous things we deal with on a daily basis is vehicles backing up. You've got dump trucks, you've got tractors, you've got pavers, you've got all sorts of equipment with a large amount of blind area backing up throughout the day in a work zone. And that is definitely one of the most dangerous things we deal with on a regular basis. Pickup trucks and SUVs accounted for 95 worker deaths at road construction sites from 2011 to 2015, followed by semi-trucks, automobiles, machinery, and dump trucks. So now we'll move into some of the work zone training requirements. Obviously nationwide, you've got a standard for work zone training requirements, and then in Virginia, you've got the Virginia Work Area Protection Manual, which is what we follow in Virginia compared to the national. Within the Work Area Protection Manual, you have all of the traffic setups you might need. You've got the requirements for PPE and training. I did want to mention the requirements for training. So if you're setting up or taking down traffic, you're required that personnel involved in the development, design, implementation, operation, inspection, and enforcement of work zone related transportation management and traffic control be trained, appropriate to the job decisions each individual is required to make. So who needs training? Anyone who is responsible for work zone traffic control planning, design, implementation, inspection, and/or for supervising the selection, placement, or maintenance of the traffic control schemes and devices in the work zones of the state highway systems, right-of-way. That includes department employees, contractors, consultants, permit, utility, and others. Where can the standards be found? Again, the Virginia Work Area Protection Manual. This is the Bible for if you're out there setting up or taking down traffic for a work zone. So you've got a few different types of training requirements. Just the basic work zone traffic control training is a 1-day maintenance-based course. Direct responsibility for placement of the work zone, traffic control devices, direct responsibility for field maintenance of work zone traffic control devices, VDOT maintenance managers. This is a good example of who would use this. The intermediate work zone traffic control training is a 2-day inspection-based course. It's for anyone who's involved in the inspection of the placement of operation function of work zone traffic control devices, construction supervisor responsibilities, maintenance of traffic coordinators on the construction projects, traffic control supervisors, and then personnel with responsibility for the development of work zone safety policies and procedures. So in a work zone on the road, you're required to have somebody present with the intermediate work zone traffic training. 2-day course, and there's there's quite a few instructors in the Virginia area I know that provide this training. We have somebody in-house that does it, but it is required at every job site. This is just an example in the Work Area Protection Manual of a basic traffic control setup. There's been some changes over the last few years with rumble strips and other things that are being introduced to the manual. The only thing I'll say is, occasionally it's not going to be what you see in the manual verbatim. You're going to have to take maybe 2 or 3 traffic control setups and combine different scenarios for the particular road you're on. You may have a roundabout with different lane closures and things that it's not going to be all on one traffic control plan in the book, so you might have to combine a few. The intermediate work zone class is going to teach you how to use the Virginia Work Area Protection Manual to set up traffic control. So that's why that intermediate work zone training is required for somebody on site in a work zone, because that person is going to be taught how to read this book, look at it, and make sure that all the signs and cones are placed correctly in a work zone. Some of the requirements include high visibility requirements. This was a change from 2012, so it's somewhat older, but I still think it's worth mentioning. It was the requirement to have Class 2 high visibility safety vests, but that is no longer the case. Now it is Class 3 safety vests. The difference with these, there's a little more striping, reflective striping, and also you have sleeves on the Class 3 where you don't on the Class 2. Obviously, with the sleeves and more high visibility striping, you've got enhanced visibility in the work zone, making everyone safer. And then the trousers, the high visibility Class E trousers are required at night for anybody involved in the setup or takedown or maintenance of traffic control devices. And then any flagger is required at night to have Class 3 high visibility trousers. So that means any flaggers and anyone setting up or taking down traffic control devices, it is not required for those working in the work zone, but I do recommend it. I think it's a best practice to have everybody in these trousers at night, just to increase visibility on in the roadway, in the work zone. Lastly, for high visibility requirements, we are required to have 10 square inches of reflective tape on hard hats when you're ever in the work zone in Virginia. So how you put that on is kind of up to you, but it should be visible 365 degrees around the hard hat, and it just needs to be 10 square inches. So internal traffic control plan is one of the keys to providing and maintaining a safe work zone. It's very important, it's necessary, it's a requirement. You've got to have an internal traffic control plan when setting up, taking down temporary traffic control devices in a work zone. Controlling traffic inside a work zone involves several principles: reducing the need for vehicles to back up, limit the access points to the job site or work zone, establish work zone layouts according to the type of equipment involved, provide signs with the work zone to guide workers, equipment, and trucks, design buffer spaces to protect pedestrian workers from errant vehicles or equipment. As many roadway workers are killed by construction vehicles as by the driving public. And again, I mentioned this earlier, and I think it's worth mentioning again, but as part of this traffic control plan, you should be planning your work to reduce the need to back up within the work zone. I know on bigger highways, this involves where you have the trucks enter into the work zone to back into the paver. The best thing to do, obviously, is in between the cones, but just reduce the amount of space they have to back up to the paver. Limit the access points to the job site or work zone. You don't want to be inviting the traveling public into your work zone, which is easy to do by accident by leaving too much space between cones or not being as obvious as you should be on telling the traffic where to go in the work zone. Work zones are tight places. Construction vehicles are big machines with large blind spots. The noise can be deafening, and there are lots of workers moving around on foot. It's very important to convey clear, concise directions to everyone in the work zone so that there is no confusion about expectation or direction. Internal traffic control plans can be built from the examples found in the Virginia Work Area Protection Manual, but you can also go online and just Google search internal traffic control plan and find lots of good examples online. Flagging operations is something that I have a special place in my heart for, I suppose. I did it for some time. For those 2 years, I did a lot of flagging. And it is by no means the most glamorous job on the road, but it is without a doubt one of the most important jobs on the road. And it's something we take for granted, I think, a lot. These guys have a tough job. They're required to get breaks, which they don't get oftentimes. And that's something we really need to work on improving. Flaggers are the first person the traveling public is going to interact with in the work zone. So for motorists, the flagger will be the face of your company. And it's important they're adequately trained and professional. It is the flagger's job to ensure that the traveling public knows where to go in the work zone so that accidents don't occur with other motorists or work crews. Flaggers should be given a 15-minute break every 2 hours, and that is something that must be done for bathroom breaks to make sure that they are adequately hydrated and alert on the road. Flaggers shall be trained in accordance with the Virginia Work Area Protection Manual and carry an active flagger certification card. Flaggers should be positioned on the shoulder, not in the road, and without anything next to them and visible to the traveling public from at least 500 feet. And this is important because a lot of times you see some people will try to park a vehicle on the side of the road next to the flagger, and that's not good because if you've got an errant vehicle that's on their cell phone and he's coming off the road and that flagger doesn't have room to run off the road because there's a truck there, he may be smushed in between the two vehicles. So that's the reason you have that requirement that nothing be parked next to them. Something you see a lot, I know, is headphones on the road. You can't have that. These flaggers have to be free of distraction. They can't be on their cell phones when they're flagging. They've got to be focused on just that, flagging and directing traffic through the work zone. As a best practice, as I mentioned earlier, flaggers can keep an air horn to alert motorists and work crews in the event of an emergency. So I'm sure everybody's heard about the impending rumble strip regulation coming forward. This is a good thing for a lot of work zones, especially these small two-way work zones. Like the example of our accident, the woman on her cell phone, had there been rumble strips there, most likely would have been alerted to the work zone before she dropped into the 4-inch cut from the milling machine. So with the rumble strips coming up, it's going to help a lot of work zones and a lot of crews be a little bit safer to these distracted drivers. Risks, one slide probably doesn't do this justice, but it goes without saying there are just so many inherent risks involved with the work we do every day on the road. Obviously, we're working around the traveling public every day. Everything we do is very noisy, and it's very hard to hear sometimes. I know I tell our guys all the time, with backup alarms, it becomes like white noise, just something you hear every day, you get used to it. So when a dump truck starts backing up in the work zone, you've heard it so often, you don't treat it with the same respect that you did on day one on the job, and that's something to be concerned about. We work around heavy equipment. There's a lot of inherent risks with that. Most of the equipment we work around has so many blind spots to the operator, and we have to work so closely on the ground. It's just part of the job. It's just the nature of our business. Exposure to the elements. Obviously, we're working outside. We're not in a controlled environment, so we've got to deal with the heat in the summertime and any storms that might pop up. It's physically demanding work. It's certainly not easy. It's very trying on your body, and it's important to take care of yourself to make sure you're not getting hurt on the job site. We have to work around high voltage lines, and that's something I'm going to talk about in a little while, how we delineate those high voltage lines on the job site, because we constantly have dump trucks backing into pavers, lifting their beds, pulling away to clean out their beds, and there's a lot of high voltage lines in the areas where we work. It's a fast-paced work environment. That goes without saying. You've got deadlines, and with the way the weather's been, it's certainly not easy to finish all these jobs on time if you've got unexpected rain and storms. It's just something we have to deal with all the time in finishing work. And so as a result, when some of these jobs get pushed back because of weather or anything else, we're trying to do more than we should sometimes in a given day to try to rush and get these jobs finished on time. long hours. It goes hand in hand with what I just said. To get these jobs done in the summertime, I know one of the things that I never looked forward to was the sun was starting to go down on a job at night, and here you see the pickup trucks pulling the light towers. And when you see those light towers pulling in, it's going to be a long night. High turnover rate in the workforce. This is something that it's not just in asphalt, it's in the construction industry all around. And this is really dangerous because you're constantly having to train new people in the work you're doing. And every time you have somebody new come in that's not familiar with this work or the way you do things, he's a risk to everybody until he is used to working on that crew. I know one of the things that I had to learn over the years was there's so much communication that takes place that's nonverbal. That the only way that you really can speak that language is just experience on the crew. And you start to see, you know where that loader is about to go, you know where that skid steer is about to go before they do it because you understand the flow of the work zone. And you understand, how the job has gone in the past. And so when you're bringing on new people all the time, they don't know where to go. They can't anticipate these moves, and they're very much a risk to themselves and the rest of the crew. It's constantly changing work environment. No two roads are the same. Traffic's different. Overhead power lines are placed differently. You've got higher volume hours at different times and different roadways, and that's something that you've got to prepare for with your internal traffic control plan, but you can also prepare for it with something we'll talk about in a little while, a risk assessment. Difficult and unpredictable terrain. You've got blind spots. I know one of the things it talks about in the work area protection manual is when you're setting up signs and setting up your flaggers, you've always got to be prepared and aware of where these blind turns are, because you might have to extend or shorten the work zone based on blind turns and hills to make it safer so that no flagger is positioned right behind a blind turn or right over a hill. And then we're working with hazardous materials. Asphalt itself is anywhere from 300 to however many degrees hot, and it'll definitely burn your skin. So we're working with hazardous materials all the time on the job site. One of the best tools available for mitigating risk in the work zones are risk assessments. This is one of these best practices I'll talk about today. I know at our company we use risk assessments on a daily basis. Anytime we're at a new job site, anytime we're at a new stockpile, anytime the work environment has changed, it's always important to do a risk assessment. Talk about what are you about to do, what are the potential hazards associated with the task, and what can potentially hurt you. How may the risk from these hazards be controlled? Have you been given any rules or instructions which relate to the job? What is the safe way of doing the job? And are you entirely happy that you can do the job in a safe manner? Our risk assessments start out by going over the hazards associated with the job. So hazardous energy, traffic, flammable materials, heavy lifting, slip, trips, and falls. In an asphalt crew on the road, you can check almost every one of those boxes. Not all industries can say that, but there's no question that you can check all those boxes on a risk assessment in the work zone. You then go on to write out the safety measures used to negate identified hazards. So let's say for hazardous energy, let's say for overhead power lines, one of the things that we do is we put green cones out underneath high voltage power lines to delineate from other overhead lines. And what this does is allow dump trucks, while they're backed into the paver, to be able to look left or right and see where that green cone is so they know when to drop or lift their bed around high voltage power lines. You then go on to talk about the PPE that's required for the job. So obviously in the work zones in Virginia, we talked about the high visibility requirements, and then your hard hat, safety vest, steel toe shoes or safety toe shoes, and then also hearing protection in many situations, and then safety glasses. Have the hazards been eliminated, yes or no? For the most part, we check no, because at the end of the day, too many of these hazards are inherent, and you just can't mitigate them. There's not much you can do to prevent people from being on their cell phones in the work zone. We could try to, but there's little we can do to really prevent that. And then you go on to sign, everyone signs their name, who's involved in the risk assessment. And this is all done before you start the job, so everyone's got these things on their mind prior to starting work, and it really goes a long way to preventing accidents in the work zone. The only thing that is constant in life is change. And again, there's nothing about this job that's the same one day to the next. Changing conditions to consider when completing the risk assessment include, but are not limited to, weather, traffic volumes, road conditions and terrain, the scope of work, equipment required, tools required, temp labor, contractors, PPE requirements. I know many of us now are using temp laborers for flaggers, but also laborers behind the paver, around the mill machine. And when these temp services bring in new guys throughout the week, that's difficult because these are new eyes. You don't always know how much experience they have and where they've been trained, and so you've really got to take the time to talk to these guys and bring them up to speed so that they're ready to work in your work zone and meet your standard safety requirements. Task training. With temp laborers, we always try to give them a different colored hard hat. With new employees, we always have them wear an orange hard hat versus our white hard hats that our crews wear. This is a great thing to do because, like I said earlier, the equipment we're using is very limited visibility, and so anytime you can give those operators an advantage in being able to pinpoint a new employee on the job, it goes a long ways. Because they may look at an experienced worker, see where he's walking and know that he can go ahead and back up because that guy's going to get out of the way. But if it's a new employee, he doesn't know where he's going, and you start to back up and he goes into your blind spot and you hit him or run him over, it's just not something that anybody wants to live with. So anything you can do to delineate a new employee, it goes a long way. And with the high turnover rate that I talked about earlier, often we fail to spend the time necessary to adequately train new employees for their tasks that they will have to perform on the road. Like with these temp laborers or anyone else, I know I've been out on the job plenty of times talking to these guys and said, hey, where did you come from? What did you do before this? And a lot of times it's this guy's first time on a road construction crew. And in my opinion, somebody like that needs a days worth of training at least to really understand how the work zone works and what's required and how the flow is to safely work in that work zone. One of the things that we've introduced in the last few years is task training. And we actually developed this based off of MSHA's requirement for task training of new employees. And so I know when I first started on the job, they gave me a hard hat, vest, glasses, and a shovel, and basically put me out on the road and said, don't get in the way, don't get hurt. And that's fine. I made it through, I guess, but it's scary to think about that we're doing that on a regular basis and just putting these guys out there without the proper training. And so I think what MSHA does is a lot involved in task training new employees, but it goes a long ways to be in a controlled environment, let's say at your plant or at your shop, and put a new guy in a skid steer or something else and have him operate it there in a controlled environment. Maybe lay down a sample lift of asphalt somewhere around your shop and show these guys the proper way to use the shovel. I know these guys let me break my back for a while before they showed me how to really use my knee to leverage that shovel a little bit. But people joke about things like that all the time, but it doesn't take a lot to hurt your back out there on the road. So I think task training is a really good idea for new hires whenever it's feasible. We have developed task training sheets for every piece of equipment out there on the road. So it actually walks through the things to look for on that piece of equipment. It walks through our requirements, our seatbelt policy, drug policies, cell phone use, lockout, tagout policy, things like that, so that every employee is fully aware of the policies. Then it goes through step by step some of the things to look out for while they're operating that piece of equipment or working on the road on foot. I mentioned it briefly earlier, but I'll say it again. One of the things we do on the road is use green cones to delineate overhead power lines, and it really is a good practice. Down and dangerous power lines, something I learned in an OSHA course about power lines. Anytime you experience a down power line, it's on the ground. Just because it's down and on the ground doesn't mean that it's safe to walk. If you're in your vehicle and there's a down power line, if you have to get out because of a fire or something else, the thing to do is to make sure that your feet are together when you get out of that vehicle. And if you have to walk, you can either hop, which I don't completely agree with because I think you're more likely to fall, or you shuffle your feet to where your heel never crosses your toe, and you shuffle away from the down power line. The reason for this is that when a power line goes down on the ground, depending on the circumstances, that electricity can radiate out in the ground, and it radiates out in circles. And so if you step from one circle to another circle, you will complete that circuit, and it will actually arc through your body. But if you shuffle your feet and never have your toes or your heel cross your toes, past your toes, you will not complete a circuit that way. But first and foremost, you shouldn't get out of your vehicle unless you have to. You should wait for emergency personnel to get there and take care of the situation so that nobody gets killed by a high voltage power line. Seatbelts, we've got a very strict seatbelt policy at our company. And the reason is that for a lot of these vehicles and a lot of this equipment, it is designed with ROPS, so rollover protection services. And the way that works is when that tractor or that piece of equipment rolls over, it's designed to keep you safe by not allowing the equipment to crush you. But if you don't have your seatbelt on, as that vehicle or that piece of equipment rolls, you're going to come out of the seat and rattle around inside of that cage or that ROPS. And that kills a lot of people every year in construction in general. And so it's critical that on a regular basis, employees are checking their seatbelts to make sure they're not frayed or damaged, and also make sure that at all times when operating that equipment, they are wearing their seatbelts. I know a lot of guys say that on a roller, they feel that they could jump off the roller in time as it's starting to roll over before that it crushes them. But more often than not, that doesn't happen. As a roller turns over, that person typically tries to jump out, falls in front of it, and gets crushed by the roller. Whereas if you just stayed in, strapped in with your seatbelt, the ROPS would protect you from getting crushed. Communication is very, very important on the job site. Again, like I said earlier, I feel like a lot of the communication that goes on in a work zone is nonverbal, and the only way to know how to speak that language is just to be on the crew for a long period of time. All the equipment we work with has a lot of blind spots. So it's imperative when working around heavy equipment to maintain constant visual and or verbal communication between the operator and the ground crew. You can't say that enough. Anytime somebody's walking around a loader or an excavator or anything else, you need to make sure that you've got visual contact with that operator so that he knows what you're about to do. There are also some areas that employees should never be, such as in between the paver and the dump truck or directly behind the milling machine. I know we had an incident a couple years ago, and we discovered that a milling machine can actually jump backwards and travel some distance in a short period of time. So really, you don't want to be directly behind the milling machine. It's a very big machine that moves forward very slow, but that drum is turning at a high RPM. And if it catches rebar or anything else that's underneath the asphalt that you aren't aware of, that milling machine is going to run backwards fast. Backup alarms, I talked about earlier, how it becomes kind of background noise, something that you can really get used to. And so I think a good idea that some places are doing is using different backup alarms for different vehicles, or just changing up their backup alarm sign signal every so often so that it just becomes something new that you're not used to, catches your attention. It's a good idea, so it's not that same reverse alarm that you hear all the time. Reverse cameras are very important. I know we have those installed on all of our dump trucks now. It goes a long ways in helping prevent backovers and rollovers for anyone working behind a dump truck. And just so everyone's aware, anytime you have a backup camera on a dump truck, if you've installed it, it has to be working. It has to be functioning properly. So that means the camera has to be cleaned and working properly if it is installed on that piece of equipment. There's a lot of new technology out there that goes a long ways in improving worker safety in the work zone. One example is proximity detection systems. So with these systems, you actually have a worker wear a device, and then you have a device in the piece of equipment, let's say a loader. And when that worker gets too close to the loader in a blind spot, it will alert the operator to his presence. So if you've got a worker that's just walked right up behind the loader and you can't see him and you're about to back up, this system's going to alert you to that worker on the ground. You can also set these up on the paver and other pieces of equipment to help prevent accidents between pieces of equipment. So that if a paver operator and a loader get too close to each other, these systems will alert the operators to help avoid an accident. Work zone intrusion alarm systems. These are installed on cones in the work zone to alert workers, but also drivers to distracted drivers, coming into the work zone. So let's say a guy on his cell phone is not paying attention to the redirection of traffic and he crosses through the cones. It's going to start blowing air horns on those cones to alert the workers, but also the driver, and so hopefully it'll prevent an accident from happening. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the giant hogweed. I know it sounds almost like a joke, but it is serious. It looks a lot like milkweed. It's not native to this area, but there's been several cases this year in Virginia of people being exposed to the giant hogweed. And it'll lead to third-degree burns, and if you get it in your eyes, it can cause blindness. So obviously, as we're walking down the road every day, I know we're already having to deal with snakes and ticks and alpha-gal and things like that. This is just something else to keep in mind. If you see something like this on the road, don't go near it because it's nasty stuff. So in closing, I think it's important to remind everybody why this is so important. It's easy out there every day to hear the same old safety spiel, and like the backup alarms, it becomes background noise. But at the end of the day, we all have families and friends that we want to go home to every day, and that's really the reason that we want to work safely. And when tragic things happen on in the work zone, it sometimes takes these kinds of things to remind us just why it is that we want to work safe every day. So this video is a great example of that exact message. And so I'll close with this. It's a moment can save a life.
Oh, honey, you look so beautiful.
Thanks, Mom. I'm so nervous.
Oh, sweetie, don't be nervous. You got this. Let me go get you a bouquet.
You look amazing.
Thanks, Dad.
I can't believe you're wearing that old necklace.
You know the rule. Something old, something new.
Shall we?
There are days when you know your life will change. You can look back and see the small moments that make such a difference. Even a single moment can lead to big changes.
I saw it, and I just thought of you.
Thanks, Dad. I love it.
I gotta go to work.
No!
I gotta go, sweetheart. The crew needs all of us to be there so we can all stay safe.
You promise to stay safe out there today, Dad?
What do we say every day?
Every day before work starts, we talk about staying safe and smart. We wear our safety pants and vests so everyone can see us best. We put out barrels, cones, and signs so drivers stay inside their lines. We work together, no one's alone. That way we make it safely home.
Just an average day. A small moment. But it changed my life.